God förmiddag och välkomna ska ni vara till ett specialavsnitt som vi sänder idag här 4 december 2024. Jag är tillbaka med 2 stycken spännande gäster. Det är Erik Brundin från Intervalor och Kai Curry från Nischfunds som ska prata om en megatrend som vi kallar active recycling. Men först av allt så är det ju så att en mick var och då börjar vi med att presentera Erik Brundin. Välkommen!
Ja, tack Johan. Stort tack, roligt att vara här. Inför börsveckan är ju en orubblig del av min egen veckorutin, så det är extra roligt att vara med här idag på det här specialavsnittet. Så stort tack för det.
Ja, vad roligt att höra. Ja, det är många som tittar och vi är jätteglada för alla tittare och vi hoppas att vi får ännu fler. Så ni som gillar vårt program, dela gärna vidare. Nu ska ni också ha fått se disclaimern här innan vi går in och Erik ska presentera lite om vad Intervalor gör.
Det stämmer bra. Toppen, tack Johan. Nej, men precis, Erik Brundin heter jag, kommer från ett bolag som heter Intervalor som sagt, och jag ska berätta lite om vad vi gör och hur vi hänger ihop med det här fondbolaget Active Niche Funds som vi ska titta lite närmare på idag. För det så, vi på Intervalor, vi skiljer oss nämligen en hel del från de fondbolagen som vanligtvis brukar vara med i programmet, och med det menar jag att vi själva inte är ett fondbolag eller några förvaltare, utan vi representerar istället några få utvalda internationella kapitalförvaltare på exklusiv basis i Norden. Intervalor kort sagt är experter på utländska kapitalförvaltare, där en stor del av vårt arbete går ut på att screena och utvärdera den globala fondmarknaden för att identifiera några av världens främsta kapitalförvaltare inom deras respektive delmarknader och nischer, för att sedan i förlängningen då introducera och etablera dem i Norden. Så Intervalor blir bryggan mellan nordiska investerare och de här framstående internationella kapitalförvaltarna. Och utöver vår egna aktiva sökarbete så får vi även förfrågningar från utländska kapitalförvaltare nästan praktiskt taget varje vecka från utländska förvaltare som vill etablera sig här i Norden genom oss. Och här behöver vi vara oerhört selektiva med vilka förvaltare vi vill arbeta med, just för att säkerställa att förvaltningen passar in i den nordiska marknaden och passar in lever upp till våra egna kriterier och krav, där bland annat långsiktighet och kvalitet är viktigt för oss. Det här resulterar i att vi tackar nej till ungefär 98% av de förfrågningarna vi får in. Så kan du byta slide där Johan. Ja men precis, och däremot de förvaltarna som lyckas ta sig igenom det här nålsögat är vi ju väldigt stolta över att representera. Framför er här har ni lite av ett axplock av tidigare förvaltare som vi har jobbat med genom åren. Och namn som Franklin Templeton, Pictet Asset Management, Invesco och RBC är säkert några förvaltarhus som är bekanta för er och som etablerades här i Norden genom Intervalor. Kan byta slide där. Ja men precis, och som vi ser det, inget enskilt fondbolag kan vara bäst på alla marknader och strategier. Men eftersom Intervalor väljer förvaltare som täcker olika marknader och strategier så kompletterar de varandra väldigt väl. Och det här innebär att vi kan erbjuda ett unikt helhetskoncept vad gäller global förvaltning. Och det ni har framför er, gå tillbaka där, precis. Och det ni har framför er här är våra 5 förvaltarsamarbeten vi har idag. Och vi kommer inte hinna fördjupas i alla de här idag. Men bara för att nämna ett par av dem så har vi då exempelvis Polen Capital som inte får förväxlat med landet Polen på något sätt, utan det här är en amerikansk fondjätte som förvaltar runt $65 miljarder. Det är inget litet fondbolag med andra ord. Men det är en fundamentalt driven aktieförvaltare, grundades 1989 med deras flaggskeppsfond Poland US Focus som i nästan 35 år har faktiskt konsekvent överpresterat mot S&P, erbjuder starkt alfa där. Vi har också Eden Tree Investment Management och det här är, skulle jag säga, originalhuset för ansvarsfulla och etiska investeringar. De lanserade sin första hållbara fond redan på 80-talet, så här är de verkligen pionjärer inom det området. Och det som utmärker den här förvaltaren bland annat är att de ägs till 100% av en välgörenhetsstiftelse som har sin koppling till Church of England. Det här innebär att 100% av vinsterna det här fondbolaget gör går till välgörenhetsändamål. Och det gör fondbolaget till Storbritanniens tredje största företagsgivare till välgörenhet. Där det bara är Barclays Bank och The Football Association som ger mer pengar. Och här i Norden kan vi erbjuda deras Green Future-fond som är den fokuserar på grön omställning och den har 9 stycken så kallade investeringsvertikaler eller teman som representerar de mest attraktiva investeringsmöjligheterna som den gröna omställningen har att erbjuda. Så den är vi väldigt glada över att ha i vårt produktportfölj. Quonium Asset Management är faktiskt Intervalors senaste förvaltarsamarbete. Det här är en Frankfurt-baserad kvantförvaltare som ingår i koncernen Union Investment som förvaltar runt 420 miljarder euro. Så det är inte heller en liten spelare vi pratar om här. Särskilt utmärker deras emerging market-strategi som har, men den har levererat ett 3% årligt alfa varje år sedan fondstart 2010 och även till en avsevärt lägre volatilitet än sin jämförelsemarknad. Jätteintressant, väldigt glad över att ha fått det samarbetet på plats. Men sen Intervalor jobbar ju också mer med specialiserade och nischade fondbolag och strategier. Och här är ju Active Niche Funds ett väldigt bra exempel på det. I Norden erbjuder vi 2 av deras fonder. Det är delvis syskonfonden till recycling som är Active Solar, världens enda aktivt förvaltade aktiefond som har ett uteslutande fokus på solenergisektorn. Det är ett väldigt intressant case det med givetvis. Men idag har vi ju då lite långfararbesök ända från Schweiz faktiskt här i Stockholm, vilket är jätteroligt. Så vi har Kai här som förvaltar Active Recycling, superintressant sektor som står inför massiv tillväxt. Men allt det där tänkte jag faktiskt lämna över till Kai. Han gör nog ett mycket bättre arbete på att presentera den fonden än jag. Så med det sagt tänkte jag lämna över till Kai här som jag har bredvid mig. Kai, welcome to Stockholm, Sweden.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Although I didn't fully understand everything. Although I'm Swedish, my Swedish is currently gone. Hopefully, maybe one day can come back. So yes, today I'm here to speak about our active recycling fund. If we can go to the next slide. So active recycling is one of the funds within the Active Niche family. Active Niche was founded by Pascal Rocha, the CEO, in 2007. He originally started with Active Solar, and today the company manages over 400 million across 7 funds, and we have 5 fund managers. But specifically, the 2 flagship funds are Active Solar and Active Recycling. Active Recycling, currently I'm the lead fund manager, and then we have Arnaud, he's a co-analyst for both the recycling fund and the solar fund, and then Pascal, who originally founded solar, then founded recycling, is still part of the investment committee with his many years of experience in the industry, and so that's kind of the team that manages active recycling today. So today, active recycling, we're talking about a UCITS fund that was launched in 2014. So we have a 10-year track record at this point in time. The reference currency is in US dollar. We also have a euro and Swiss franc share class. All currencies are fully hedged, meaning even the US dollar share class, if we invest in euro, that is hedged. And then if you invest in the euro share class, that is fully hedged as well, meaning an investor doesn't take any FX risk or bet, if you like. On top of that, the fund is an Article 9 fund, which is quite important, very strong focus on sustainability. Before we go into the investment thesis itself, I always talk about the definition of recycling, because that gives you a good view on our investment universe. So when we think about recycling, we typically think about the end process where you already have pre-separated scrap metal, for example, and then you transform it into something usable. But actually, before you can do that, you have to collect your waste, you have to separate it, and then you have to process it so it can be prepared to be transformed. We invest in the full value chain of recycling. So that's quite important, because in our universe, we have those companies that transform your metal, but we also have your typical waste management companies that collect your waste. That's quite a broad set. And so to continue on this train of thoughts, actually, active recycling is a very unique opportunity within the thematic universe, specifically because of this. So when we think about thematic funds, typically how they behave as one. And what I mean by that is if we take AI for an example, if you invest in an AI thematic fund, as long as the AI story remains true, they will all go up together. And as soon as there's headwind on one of the companies, on the general thesis, they will all go down, because they're all driven by the same factor. Recycling is not at all like this. It's a very diversified fund in and of itself. On one hand, we have the metal recyclers who are impacted by interest rates and industrial demand. Then on the other hand, we have your waste collecting companies who have 12-year contracts with municipalities that have absolutely no correlation with the metal recyclers. And then we have the paper recyclers who have other drivers, and so on and so on. And so we have this very, very diversified fund, which is very unique within the thematic world. The other big difference that we have is now, again, we have a mega trend pushing all recycling companies, but they all have different drivers, but they're also companies in a different type of world or industry that you typically have in the thematic world. And what I mean by that is, often if we take AI, by example, we're looking at the high growth companies. We don't really look at the revenues yet. And so you have high valuations with ton of volatility. You don't have this in recycling. Again, metal companies that have been around for 30, 40, 50 years. We have a company in the portfolio who's been around for 100 years. And so you have a lot of visibility with much, much lower valuation. And so a lot less volatility. But you have to put the fund in the right perspective. We're talking about industrial companies, paper manufacturers, waste collecting companies, and they have very different profile than your high growth techie companies. So that's important when you look at the fund, to put it in the right perspective and portion of your portfolio. It's more of a defensive type of investment, I would say. So now the mega trend that pushes all the companies, regardless if they're the metal ones or your waste recycling companies, what is pushing all these companies together is actually the volume of recycled material, who is growing tremendously. If you look at the graph between 2016 and 2022, that volume doubled. And it was expected to double again between 2022 and 2030, and we're actually ahead of that trend. So by the time we get 2030, we will have more than doubled. So the next part of the presentation, we're going to break down how do we get to this doubling of volume of material recycled. The first part is pretty simple, is we get more and more waste. So just to go back 1 second, how do we get to this volume of material recycled is how much waste the world generates and what percentage of that waste do we recycle. Both variables go up. So if we look at the first variable, how is it, on the next slide, how is it that we produce more and more waste? Where there's a very, very strong correlation between the mean income of a population, which is the height of your graph, and then the size of and the amount of waste that population produce. And the width of the graph is the size of the population. So if you look at the graph very, very simply, the majority of the world is below $13 a day. They have a very low mean income, but is growing tremendously. To put this in perspective, if you look at China, close to 15 years ago or so, they were much closer to India. At that time, they had spare capacity to treat waste, so they could buy waste from the West. What has happened in the last 15 years, they had to ban that practice, double their capacity to treat waste, and they have to export waste today because they cannot keep up. That's going from around $5 or $6 a day to $13 a day. But the West is between 60 and 70, and they're growing and going towards there. So to summarize this very simply, we have a waste problem globally, worldwide. Okay, so what can we do about this? Well, either you can burn it without transforming it into energy, it's a cost, or you can throw it in landfills, it's a cost, or you don't treat it at all, you leave it in the environment and then you have to clean it up, it's a cost. Your only other option is to recycle it, and that generates revenues. So if you really take a high-level approach to the problem, it makes a lot of sense to go towards recycling. Now, on top of this, there's another caveat. If we look at CO2 emissions, 25% of global emissions are derived from raw material extractions, mining, oil and gas, and so on and so on. Well, if you produce a good, let's say steel, for example, out of scrap steel, so recycled steel, as opposed to virgin steel, so out of the mining industry, well, the end product is exactly the same. But it consumes 60% less energy to do the same end product, but with scrap steel, so from recycling. If you look at aluminum, that's 95%. If we go to the next slide, actually, I have a chart that shows the energy savings by material. So aluminum, you're at 95%, plastic, you're at 70%, steel, you're at 60%, paper, you're between 40 and 50%, and so on and so on. So you have a massive energy gain by using recycled material as opposed to virgin material, but the end product is exactly the same. So we solve the big physical problem of what do we do with waste, and we help climate change. Because of this, of course, you have all governments that are pushing towards more and more recycling, and we see this everywhere. In the US, it was in the Inflation Reduction Act. Last year, there was never been as much investment into recycling well, since the history of the US. Europe, they're more, instead of giving an incentive, they're more putting legislation in place. And if you don't follow it, you have fines. Actually, what just recently happened is Spain realized that they were not going to meet those regulations. And they're planning on buying machines that help people return bottles and so on and so on. So one of the companies that we invest in actually jumped 15% because they make the machines that help people to recycle the bottles. But so what we're seeing is all the governments, because it makes so much sense, are pushing more and more regulation, different ways towards more and more recycling. Then your next driver, if you want on the next slide, is on the demand side. So what's great is if you have government on one side pushing for something, and then you have people wanting that same thing at the same time, you have very little friction for the theme to happen. So this is what we're seeing. We have people are much more sensitive to pollution as a whole and to recycling as a solution. And then we see it in brand productions. Today, you can buy jackets. In the past, it was probably only Patagonia if you wanted a recycled jacket. Today, it's every single brand, whether it's North Face or Peak Performance or Patagonia or anything you want. Same with any bags you want to do or shoes. You can see McDonald's, for example, Coca-Cola. McDonald's does that well, but the example works better with Coca-Cola. They're changing their entire supply chain to produce their bottles or to buy bottles that are recycled. Okay, so why are they doing this? Only because there's demand, because actually it costs them 15 to 30% more to buy a recycled plastic than virgin plastic. So this is quite important to know that plastic is traded at 15 to 30% higher price than virgin, and that's because of demand, not because of the cost side. And I'll get back to why it's important actually in the next slide. So we have an opportunity here because there's a lot of drivers pushing for more and more recycling. But I would say probably over the last 15 years or so, as we saw, you had a massive increase in volume, but maybe not a lot happening in the space as far as innovation or R&D. The reason I was focusing on this spread between virgin plastic and recycled plastic is because that's starting to happen with other materials. And these are the things that are happening in the space right now, today. It didn't happen a year and a half ago. So this is live. The example is at the beginning of the year, if you read the earnings report for steel producing companies, well, the industry wasn't doing very well, specifically because the economy was slowing down, and so the industrial demand slows down. And so the manufacturing capacity that was used overall across the industry of steel was 75% Q1, Q2. Okay, so that's not very good. But if you look at the recyclers who make the exact same product, chemically speaking, there's absolutely no difference. There's no weakness in a recycled product. And the price is the same. It's like oil. There's one price for the same end product. Well, they were working at 90% capacity. How is that possible? Why would they have more demand for the same product at the same price? Well, it's because it takes 60% less energy to make, and the buyers for the steel, they want to decarbonize their supply chain, so lower scope 3 emissions. So they go there. So now what happened around Q3 is the companies start to say, well, maybe we should rename our product. We're going to rename it green steel. And actually, just a couple of days ago, Bloomberg published an article talking exactly about green steel and the exploding demand. Green steel didn't exist a year ago. This is a new name that Bloomberg are publishing articles and saying that the product is going to double in demand when the market doesn't fully exist yet. So this is what we're living through, and that's benefiting the metal recyclers tremendously. This is also happening in paper. If you look at Smurfit Westrock, which actually had an M&A together this year, there were two different companies before, or DS Smith, you can look at the stock price just over this year. They went up tremendously. Why? Because if you look in your grocery stores, everything that's used to be made out of plastic is today changing on recyclable paper, and they're the leaders in the industry doing that. So we can really see this demand side also taking place, and a lot of innovation in the space that was probably a bit boring 10, 15 years ago. So this is the investments. This is the investment thesis. We have a fund that is in a very, very good position to benefit and invest in companies that benefit from this mega trend. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, we spend a good amount of time defining the investment universe, and that's because if you type or if you Google recycling companies, the companies we invest in, they will not show up because they don't consider themselves recycler. They consider themselves a metal producer or paper producer or a general waste management company. It's only us. We have to do the work and understand that 80% of the material used in the steel production is from scrap as opposed from mining, and then we consider them recycler. So we do this for all industry. Takes a bit more time, but at the same time, we understand the whole industry as a whole very well, and it helps us with investment decision. Then we do both a top-down and bottom-up analysis, understanding all the macro drivers behind the companies we invest in, the margins and so on, and then we do a full financial model to of course, understand the company on that side of things. Being an Article 9, we fully integrated the ESG analysis in our investment process. We do this internally. We can talk about it in a couple more slides in more details. And then we go on to the portfolio construction. If we can go to the next slide. So pretty much once we've done the investment process, we come up with a risk return metric or score on each company. This will dictate whether or not it enters the portfolio, and if yes, in which of our group it would fall in. A group has a target weight, and so then the allocation to that company will have that specific weight. We don't rebalance all the time as soon as it deviates from that. However, we do this in a systematic way, meaning that if it deviates too much from the target weight, we're forced as a management team to sit together and to analyze why this happened, and then should we rebalance or upgrade or downgrade the company. This forces us to make a informed, systematic decisions as opposed to emotional ones based on the rapid growth or decline of a company. That's quite important in our investment process. On the next slide. So currently, this actually reiterates the diversification of our portfolio. As I said at the very beginning, this is a unique fund because the companies are so different. So if we go through our top 10 very quickly, if you look at number 1 and number 4, they're your general waste companies. So they pick up your trash, they separate it, and then they sell the end product to people that want to transform into a new product, or to companies, not people. Then if you look at number 2 and number 3, they're the biggest steel recycling companies in the world. And then number 5 is a paper recycling company. So in the top 5, we have completely different industries already. Then you look at number 6, they're a company that makes the machine that helps to sort waste. So in the past, that was one of the hurdles in recycling, is you typically get mixed waste and you have to separate it. That was done manually. It's very inefficient and very costly. Then because there's so much demand and recycling and so much happening, companies are innovating in the space. And so we have Tomra. They make machines with robotics and AI that actually does it automatically and take away the human aspect from that process completely. Clean Harbor, they're a hazardous waste company, so they will recycle your toxic waste and oil into reusable products. Again, Eurobis is copper, Smurfit, Westrock, as I mentioned, is paper again. And so just looking quickly through the top 10, as you see, we have multiple different types of companies that are driven by different factors, but all benefiting from the same mega trend. We have currently close to 50% in the US and the rest mostly in Europe, with the 20% in APAC. What's quite interesting in this space is that companies are quite local. When we talk about waste, when we talk about recycling, companies are local. So when we invested in APAC, it's not indirectly. An example I use for this is not Nike that has a high percentage of its revenues by selling shoes in Asia. When we're in APAC, we have companies that are based there and that do business there specifically. And this is true for most of this breakdown. Another thing that I like to focus on is we also try to overweight the portion of the value chain where there is a higher margin or a higher barrier to entry, or a higher IP, intellectual property, which is why we have a higher concentration on the transformation portion and the collection portion. Most of our processing, it's actually indirect. So when companies are vertically integrated, if you think about it, companies that have been around for a long time and know how to create the end product, the transformation part, it's very hard for a new company to replicate what they do. They don't have the know-how, and it's also a lot of cost to build up the capacity to do it. On the collection, people always originally think that it's quite easy. It could be very easy to disrupt. Anybody can lease 4 or 5 garbage trucks and win one contract from a municipality. But actually, the barrier to entry is very, very big, because what do you do with the trash that you've collected? Well, you have to collect enough trash to get to your transfer station. And then once you have a transfer station, what do you do with it? Well, you actually move it to a recycling center that collects waste from multiple transfer stations. And from there, anything that cannot be recycled, separated from the recycling center, is either going to landfills or burned. The companies that we invest in are fully vertically integrated. And that means that the smaller guys that can lease 4 or 5 garbage trucks and win one contract, they have to pay our company to eventually pick up or accept the waste that they've collected. And so over time, the companies we invested grow the share of the market that they have, and it's very hard for smaller companies to get a hold in the industry. So as I mentioned before, we are an Article 9 fund, is fully integrated in our investment process. Specifically, we commit to a minimum of 70% of the portfolio in sustainable investment. What is a sustainable investment? It's an investment that has an objective towards a transition to a circular economy or pollution and prevention and control. Pollution prevention and control. When we think about recycling, it makes a lot of sense that these are the two themes that we focus on, and they go hand in hand, actually. How do we actually do this on the next slide? Well, first we have an exclusion criteria. Then once a year for every single company in-house, we analyze the company and we produce an ESG analysis that we have a document on, we end up having a score on, and we then compare that score to what an independent external provider gives us to have the consensus of what's out there compared to what we came up with doing our own due diligence. Most of the time, our scores are very close, and if not, it tells us that we need to go and look at why there's a difference. Sometimes it's because we missed something, that can happen, but often it is simply that we choose to disagree with what they have, but we've done the work, so we understand why we can disagree with this. So this is kind of how we work. This is quite important to look at. If you can see over time, we track the MSCI World quite well. It's just not on a year-to-year basis, meaning that the performance overall is quite good. But again, you have to look at the fund with a different eye than your typical thematic fund that has this high growth. But specifically, you have to understand that as long as the markets are being driven by the tech industry, like it has been for the last 2 years, the fund will not react the same way because it doesn't really have any tech. But when the market moves more together as one, as you can recall, it happened in the 2021, then the fund does really well. Also, when the market is brought down, like it was in 2022, by the tech industry, then the fund responds really well and doesn't go down as much. So you really have to position the fund in the right place. But when you compare the fund, which is actively managed, to a passive alternative, which would be your gray line, the tortoise recycling index, you can see that the active management really pays off. The reason that we have the BlackRock Circular Economy Fund here is actually not because we want to compare to it. We believe we shouldn't be compared to it, but it's to start this conversation, which we can carry on the following slide. So there's a big difference between a recycling fund and a circular economy fund. If you do the exercise and look at the revenues driven by recycling within a circular economy fund, you end up with 20 to 30%. End of last year on the BlackRock Circular Economy, we were at 23%. It changes, of course, as with different weights in which companies they enter and exit the portfolio, but this is kind of the range. So if you believe in the recycling mega trend, which we are very convinced about, a circular economy fund will not give you that exposure. It's not to say it's a good or a bad fund. It just means that you don't have the exposure to recycling. If you do the same exercise with our fund, we just recently did it. We have to update the slide. We were last year at 87%. So that's the first aspect. If you're convinced by the sorry, back to the other side. If you're convinced. Good. If you're convinced by the recycling mega trend, a circular economy fund will not give you that exposure. But the next thing to think about, and this is how we look at thematic investing, generally speaking, is that often when you look at thematic funds, a manager will accept a company as long as it contributes to the theme. Now, this is a very important point because we don't look at companies that contribute to the theme, we look at companies that benefit from the theme. So there's a big difference here. The example is Coca-Cola changing their supply chain and buying recycled plastic bottles. That contributes to the circular economy theme, but their P&L is going to be impacted by how much Coca-Cola they sell. Not at all by contributing to the circular economy fund. Same thing as you can see in the BlackRock circular economy. They have Microsoft because they increase efficiencies in companies and so they benefit circular economy. But Microsoft's P&L is the cloud. It's not a circular economy. And so that's the big difference between contributing to a theme and being able to then join a fund as opposed to benefiting. And we want to be a pure fund. And so we only have companies that benefit from a theme. So in summary, this is a great opportunity to invest in a diversified fund with the industrial types of company part of a portfolio, but that benefit from a long-term megatrend that I believe we have just illustrated and we're very convinced about.
All right. Okay, so thank you very much, Kai. One question.
Sure.
How many companies are investable in your universe?
We identify new ones every day. As I mentioned before, you cannot do a Google search and find them. We have over 80 companies, but I'm sure there are many more out there. So I would say over 100 easily. And we have it currently. I don't know if I mentioned it at the beginning. We are invested in 24 companies, so we have a very concentrated portfolio.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you very much. Very good presentation. I guess this is a necessary mega trend for the world.
Yes, I think Eric would like to get back on the conversation.
Okay.
Perfect. Hey, Johan.
Hey.
Thank you so much, Kai, for that presentation. Very interesting. Okay, I'll switch to Swedish very briefly. Johan, för fonden finns ju på er plattform, vet jag. Ja. Och den går ju under namnet GMP Active Recycling. Gör den helt enkelt. Så
jag kommer lägga en länk nedanför i beskrivningen så det blir enkelt att hitta fonden.
Ja, men fantastiskt.
Ja, självklart.
Härligt. Stort tack, Johan. Vi går ju mot juletider här också och så vidare. Så har vi någon uppesittarkväll eller något med dig och Jonas att se fram emot?
Nej, jag vet inte. Vi laddade hårt för de sista avsnitten, men sen att också komma tillbaka efter årsskiftet med liksom en summering och liksom ett längre avsnitt då inför det kommande året när vi är tillbaka efter årsskiftet. Det är väl det som är våran plan nu, men ja, det är några avsnitt kvar. Det är lite kvar på säsongen. Vi är ute väldigt mycket och träffar fondbolag och kunder och så vidare. Så det känns väldigt kul. Och väldigt bra fond. Jag ville väldigt gärna att ni skulle vara med och presentera. Jag tyckte det var bra struktur på det. Det är en megatrend. Jag tror att det är många har missat med den här typen av bolag. Jag tror många känner till Tomra, många känner till Waste Management. Och det man har lärt sig sedan tidigare år är ju att de har ganska bra marginal i sina verksamheter. Men de har en ganska låg tillväxt. Och nu kan man ju visa upp en väldigt spännande utveckling på vad det gäller tillväxten och även nya områden som kommer till recyclingtrenden. Ja. Så det här är en fond som jag tycker man ska in och titta på. Det är någonting som kanske jag hade missat också, hur pass väl de här bolagen har utvecklats och hur pass mycket som finns här framöver.
Ja, precis.
Utvecklas med. Men i så fall så tycker jag vi ska säga då tack till alla som har lyssnat och tack så mycket Erik och Kai för att ni medverkade och ville vara med.
Stort tack Johan och tack alla som lyssnade in. Så vi säger på återseende.
På återseende. Tack så mycket.
Tack så mycket. Ha det fint.
Ha det fint.